Who the hell can wait till morning? Talk now at latenightsportsradio.com.
That's right, Glenn Fry. The heat is on. It's the last day of August 2016. If you haven't drafted yet, you are probably drafting fairly soon. It's crunch time now, and this is the perfect opportunity for the FantasyGreek.com's Fantasy Football Power Hour to help you with all of your needs. I am Keith Greek from 87 Sports Fans. Joining me, as always, is the Fantasy Greek himself, Jim Sarantias from the FantasyGreek.com. Jim, welcome to the program.
Opa, my friend, how are you?
Right, what you said.
Opa.
All right. Anybody listening, 585-633-7487 is the phone number to hit us up with any of your draft or lineup questions, or hit the hashtag, don't hit the hash, hit the hashtag AskTFG. That, once again, is hashtag AskTFG. So,
and Keith, to answer your question, I'm doing great. I actually drafted 2 teams this weekend, and I'm really happy with one. The other one I wasn't so happy with. I mean, it was fine. It was, a good team. I just, every time I was about to pick the player I wanted, somebody would pick them ahead of me, and it just became frustrating. But apparently the computer thinks I did pretty well, but I don't believe those guys. Last year, I had some computer tell me I had a D- in my team that I drafted, got me in 3rd place, so go figure.
I got a trade offer that's now like 8 days old now, because our one league drafted 2 Saturdays ago. I offered Brandon Cooks and Laquan Treadwell for Keenan Allen.
Okay.
What's your thoughts on that? Is it a fair deal?
Well, I mean, Keenan Allen's the best of the bunch. Brandon Cooks is comparable, and Laquan Treadwell, I don't think he'll ever be Keenan Allen.
It's a dynasty league, too.
Yeah, I know it's a dynasty. I mean, so you want Keenan Allen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you made a reasonable offer. I probably wouldn't give him to you, though, because I think he's that good of a player, and he's still a young guy.
Everyone accuses me of really lowballing the first offer. So do you think I'm guilty of that in this situation?
Probably, but I do that too. That's how I negotiate, and I know people are really strange. They're like, why don't you just make me this offer and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, because I don't know what it is that you want.
Right.
I mean, if you want something else, tell me, and I'll tell you whether I'm agreeable to that. I mean, that's not too much to ask.
Let's get the conversation going. You know what I mean? That's what this is about. I'm not going to sit here and offer you my best offer ever.
Yeah.
If I can get away with not giving you the best, I'm going to do that. And that doesn't make me a shark for wanting to do that way. It's just
not at all. I think you're a reasonable person, and at some point, if you really want the player, you're going to give the other person what they want. And if you don't, then life's life.
Right.
Move on.
Exactly. So, for those of you listening, whether live or later in the podcast version, you will be very happy to know that this is one of the few football programs that will not talk about the national anthem or Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah. But you know what we're going to talk about?
We're going to talk about a bunch of other things. And the first thing I want to talk about is Teddy Bridgewater.
No, before that, Keith.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So all the listeners out there, if you're drafting before the season starts next week, now's the time to go get the FantasyGreek.com's Fantasy Draft Guide from Amazon.com. Get out there. It's been doing really well. You can get it in hard copy. If you can't wait, get it in Kindle. Just go to Amazon.com and the search engine type Fantasy Greek Draft Guide. You'll see it right there. And get that ball rolling. Get yourself some free TFG access. I've been updating our top 200s to all the people that have applied for it. And, you'll be good to go. So do the right thing for yourself and get it. I can't even tell you how many compliments I've received this year. It's just been really amazing.
No, it was a very fantastic addition. I've been a part of it in the past, not this year, but it's been so people are asking, well, he's biased. I'm not biased this time. This is a totally objective point of view. It's fantastic. And, not for nothing, I am the back-to-back champion in that league, so it is what it is. So, Teddy Bridgewater, the Vikings here. Now, obviously, everyone's like, oh, man, it stinks. But, I mean, let's be honest. statistic-wise, Bridgewater was not a Tom Brady or anything like
No.
that. But the Vikings are more a team where they are the sum of their parts is equal than their individual talents. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You take one cog out of that. I don't know if Sean Hill or whoever they end up getting, if they get anybody at all. I don't know how much they can really add to this because they all just kind of cohese together, offense, defense, together. So you take Bridgewater out of that. Does this hurt your rankings for like an Adrian Peterson, Stephon Diggs, Laquan Treadwell, any of those guys?
Well, I can't say that it hurts Adrian Peterson. Really the way to look at it is it almost helps him a little bit, or at least solidifies him as a player who will be guaranteed 350 touches. And just by virtue of that, he remains a top, number one running back. First round draft pick in non-PPR leagues, and PPR leagues we could debate whether he's first round or second. That's a different story for a different show. But, I don't see how it does. For Stephon Diggs, Laquan Treadwell, throw in Kyle Rudolph, throw in Charles Johnson, I think it hurts them all. Laquan Treadwell is still a dynasty grab because you're looking at the future for him, and he's a player to hold on to. But in redraft leagues, I'd avoid him. I'd avoid Stephon Diggs. I'd avoid Charles Johnson. I'd rather see how they do. And, if Sean Hill ends up, doing better than he did in 2010 when he started 10 games for the Lions and threw 2,686 yards and 16 TDs, yikes. Then I'd go get him. But in a redraft league, I can think of so many other players I'd rather draft with higher upside. I would avoid those guys.
Right, would agree.
And it even hurts their defense, I think, a little bit. Just a little bit in the sense that if this offense can't execute and is constantly, 3 and out, their defense is going to take a beating. So draft them. But, there's a couple defenses now I think you could take ahead of them. Maybe the Chiefs. You could even go get the Steelers if you wanted to, or the Bengals, Patriots. But, you just if you pick them up, you just got to watch how this plays out.
When you lose your starting quarterback like that, you think that the Vikings will be facing a lot more 8-man fronts, therefore make life on Peterson that much harder?
You would think, but his life has been easy.
True.
As a running back, he has had worse situations than this and done just fine. So, I'm just leaving him where he is. And if this news really scares you that much, you can grab Lamar Miller instead. You can grab, whoever the next running back is in line at the time that you could be taking Peterson. There's a couple other guys. Okay. So you can say, I'll take him, and they'll put up comparable points. Let's see who else would be in that area. So Ezekiel Elliott could be there. Lamar Miller could be there. Devonta Freeman could be there. Mark Ingram can be there, and they're all going to put up comparable points within, let's say, 10 to 20 fantasy points of Adrian Peterson. So that's a sacrifice of 1 fantasy point per week. That's not going to kill you.
True. Well, God, when you put it like that, it makes total sense. So it's kind of a different situation, but the question the same, being how does it affect the other fantasy players on the team? But Denver naming Trevor Siemian as the starting quarterback I know Mark Sanchez was the guy whose place he's taken. So Sanchez is what Sanchez is. Do Demaryius Thomas, does Emmanuel Sanders, do they take a hit? Is C.J. Anderson, any of those guys, or is it pretty much status quo?
I think it's status quo. One way or another, the way I evaluated the players were, it would not be a great quarterback. I was actually very happy to see how Siemian was doing in the preseason and that he seemed to be fairly effective in his play of the game. I still don't think that – I think Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders are being overdrafted. I did in a draft the other night, I saw Demaryius was taken by one team as their third wide receiver, but that was a 10-team league. So, maybe he was still a little overdrafted. I'm concerned. I'm looking for players that give me 50%, 60% or more of their games over the course of a season. They will post quality fantasy games, which we talk about in our draft guide, which in the case of a receiver would be double-digit fantasy points. They can do that. They're relevant. And I'm concerned that while you may see some of those games with Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, there'll be a lot of games in between that they don't, or it's a roller coaster. And that in fantasy football just scares me. And I sort of say, again, there are just other players that I think you would be better off putting your draft or spending your draft pick on. And if for some reason you can take those guys as a backup, that's a different situation, and then I might consider it.
All right. So sticking on the fantasy injury standpoint, because are you one of those guys that thinks that like the preseason needs to be cut down or eliminated completely?
No, I think the preseason as it is should just stand. I mean, I enjoyed this past week, the week of games, and actually last week even more, because the first week you're kind of like, everybody's still a little rough. The second week, you start seeing some things happen and you're getting excited. The third week, the starters are playing enough time that you really get to evaluate whether or not the things you saw in week 2 are sticking, whether they really are a pretty good team or they might actually have some more adjustments to make and therefore may struggle when the season starts. This coming week, it's not for the starters. It's for the backups. It's for guys that are fighting for just a few roster spots on a team and possibly to be signed by another team, or maybe to see a diamond in the rough. But how many Victor Cruzes are we going to see? I'll wait to hear about him. The week 4 seems pretty much a waste in terms of football viewing. It's more for the coaches and the players. But I like the preseason as is.
Okay. So now going down some of the injuries, banging up some names that everyone's focusing on drafting. Thomas Rawls hasn't really been a big factor or participant in the preseason. Started on the PUP list and everything. Pete Carroll says he has no doubts that he'll play in week 1. What's your take in Seattle? I mean, there's Rawls, there's Precise, there's Kristen Michael. Are you staying away from the Seattle running back conundrum until we figure something out there?
No, I'm not. I truly believe that the Seahawks, that their philosophy is run the football first, and their preference is to run the football first through one running back. With a second that will spell that starter from time to time. I'm a firm believer in what Pete Carroll has said, that Thomas Rawls is their starting running back, that he will be their workhorse running back. He says he'll be ready for week 1. I believe him. It's possible in week 1 he may not get a full workload. They may just sort of bring him in, a little slowly, I suppose. And Christine Michael might get more carries, or not more carries, but more than he would had Thomas Rawls been a full go. But I really think this is the Thomas Rawls show. And let's see, where do I have him ranked? I have him. I'm pretty high. I know most websites probably have him going around pick 40. I think he's valued at number 26, and among all fantasy players. So I'm still looking at him, saying to myself, and if this guy is truly healthy, he could be a top 10 fantasy player this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Top 10, huh?
Yeah. Because if it wasn't for his broken leg, there'd be no concern here. We would all be saying he's the starter, and he's going to rule the day. He's replacing Marshawn Lynch.
Yeah, beast mode light.
Yeah, whatever.
Without the sugar from the Skittles.
Without the hair.
Right, that too.
Yeah.
All right, Carlos Hyde, running back, San Francisco 49ers, has been suffering with a concussion. Sacramento Bee reports that he worked out on a side field Tuesday. Now, he was a guy that I was kind of looking at as possibly a sleeper resurgent under Chip Kelly's offense, kind of what his teams like to run the ball, unless you're a DeMarco Murray owner last year, of course. San Francisco is really a quagmire to begin with. Forget about the backup quarterback that's making a stink right now, but Blaine Gabbert is their starter right now. I mean, how much can we really expect from any San Francisco running back, including Carlos Hyde? Are you a Hyde fan, or are you staying away?
Well, I'm a Hyde fan in general. I would draft him as my second running back, with possibly a couple running backs ahead of him who are likely going to be RB2s. He's the only fantasy player on that team worth drafting. I don't think there's another player to spend a draft pick on at this point. And really, the preseason was an opportunity to see if Blaine Gabbert would show any chemistry with Patton, Ellington, Torrey Smith, and we didn't really see that at all. Torrey Smith, I forget how many targets he had. I think it's less than 5. Bruce Ellington's done for the season, and now all we have is Quentin Patton, and I'm not sure what we're getting from him. So I'm staying away from all them. Carlos Hyde, to me, is worth an RB2 pick probably in the 4th round. I have, in the 2 teams I've not had the opportunity to draft him. The concussion thing makes me nervous, but I guess it would with any player. Has he had a history of concussions? I don't believe so. So to me, if he comes back from the concussion fine, he should be fine. There's nothing that will. There's no indicator one way or another whether a player is going to suffer a concussion. I mean, it's going to happen or it's not going to happen. So that's how I treat him. I wouldn't say stay away from him, but I think there's other running backs that, if you feel like Eddie Lacy, I would take ahead of him. No questions asked, even though I'm not the biggest Eddie Lacy fan. Certainly Doug Martin, Matt Forte, LaShawn McCoy, Thomas Rawls, Mark Ingram, and then at that point we're hitting the top guys. So I would definitely take those guys ahead of Carlos Hyde.
It's svelte Eddie Lacy this year, just so you know. You have to call him.
Let's hope that sticks.
All right, head over to Kansas City now, and the word from ESPN today that Jamaal Charles is behind schedule in his recovery from last year's torn ACL and has not yet regained the role of featured back. So now, before this news today, if you were going to draft Jamaal Charles, obviously you got to get some kind of insurance, right? So who's his best handcuff in Kansas City? Is it still Charkandrick West?
Spencer Ware.
Okay.
The way things started playing out, it started appearing that Spencer Ware is going to have a role in this offense no matter what. The question is how much. Will it be a role like Thomas Jones when Thomas Jones was with the Chiefs at the same time as Jamaal Charles? If so, that's a pretty significant role, and he would be earmarked for 1,000 yards and 6 TDs. But we don't know that. Based on the recent news, it sounds like Charles is either going to miss time or his role will be, at least at the beginning of the season, reduced in such a way that his fantasy value may be tenuous. You may be better off benching him. And Spencer Ware would be the starter. So it's a really strange situation because prior to that news, I considered him to have first-round value. This whole knee injury thing from last year didn't scare me off from him because he rehabbed really well from his previous knee injury. The offseason film we saw of him working out was fine. All reports were positive. The only thing that's not positive is that he still seems a little bit behind. Okay, that's just life. And, in a couple weeks he should be good to go. So now to me he's more of a second to third round sort of pick. And, again, there's other running backs you could take ahead of him, or if you decide to go wide receiver heavy in your first couple of rounds, you would just skip him altogether and get your running backs in the third, fourth, or even fifth round. So that's the evaluation or how you should view Jamaal Charles if you're drafting this coming week.
Now, let's not forget he's 29 years old, too. So he's getting closer to that magic 30 number where the body just starts doing funky stuff, being slow to heal. I'm sure he'll come back eventually. But if you're an owner of Charles, especially in maybe dynasty formats, are you trying to sell him right now?
Depending what you can get for him, I would. Okay. If you were going to give me Keenan Allen, I'd trade you in. No problem. No questions asked. So, all
right.
I think he's worth something. His career is certainly, at the end of his career, a few years away. So, if you can get a young 20-something with a lot of upside, Zeke Elliott, why not?
All right, let's swing over to some wide receivers now. John Brown over in Arizona, also fighting a concussion. He's been medically cleared to play, according to azcardinals.com. Where does John Brown fit in the holy triumvirate of Cardinals receivers here between Larry Fitzgerald, Michael Floyd, and John Brown?
That's gonna be highly debated. I know everybody's been really high on Michael Floyd this offseason. To me, they're all wide receiver threes, all three of them. And it's really a question of who you take first. I actually have John Brown in one format. Let me see if I can figure this out. Ranked ahead of the other two. It's not PPR, so it must be non-PPR. I have Larry Fitzgerald as the higher ranked amongst the three in PPR. Everybody expects Larry Fitzgerald to break down, and I've made it abundantly clear that I think that that's misconstrued. The only way that Larry Fitzgerald does not have a good season this year is if Carson Palmer doesn't have a good season. 2 out of the last 3 years, Larry Fitzgerald has posted 1,000 yards, more importantly, double-digit TDs when Carson Palmer played a full season. In the one season that he did not, I think he was injured in Game 9, something like that, Larry Fitzgerald's numbers faltered. So that's what you should expect this year. If anything happens to Carson Palmer, Larry Fitzgerald is going to take a hit. But that's why you don't view Larry Fitzgerald as anything more than a wide receiver 3, if you're lucky. Same thing with John Brown and Michael Floyd. And the only reason why I'm not as high on Michael Floyd as everyone else is we've heard it before. This isn't the first time everybody has jumped up and down and said, oh, this is Michael Floyd's year. Based on the body of work that we've seen from him over these last few seasons that he's been a pro, he hasn't done that. So I'm not jumping on that train, again, because I think there's other wide receivers you could take that are sort of at that level that I think are better selections in a fantasy draft.
585-633-7487. The number is 585-633-7487. Even if you are listening after the show is already recorded and not listening live, leave a voicemail on there. We'll get you on the next show. All right, staying on the wide receiver tip, Brandon Marshall, New York Jets, hip injury. Todd Bull says there's no concern. Marshall's a little too long in the tooth for me to buy that standing down. Are you still high on Marshall?
Absolutely, 100%. This is not a new problem for him. He's sort of had a hip issue for the last several years. I mean, he's 30-something, so he's being held out. Brandon Marshall does not need to be on the football field right now. In week 1, he will be. He was the most targeted player on that team last year. 1,500 yards, double-digit TDs. This is something he had done with the Bears two seasons ago. I don't know that he'll hit 1,500 again, but the kind of production he should have makes him a wide receiver 1 and a top pick in fantasy football drafts.
Yeah,
he's being underdrafted right now.
Especially now that Fitz is back. I mean, you can probably expect a carbon copy, as long as everybody stays healthy, of last year, and adding Forte to that mix really makes that offense a lot more dynamic than it was last year.
It really should. It really, really should.
Emmanuel Sanders, missed practice due to an illness, whatever. Devontae Parker in Miami here. Now, I was spending some time looking over the Dolphins roster the other day, and they really do, on paper, seem to have the talent to really improve on last year. Now, new head coach Adam Gase, in Chicago, he managed to be the quarterback whisperer and calm down Jay Cutler. So if he can do that same kind of magic with Ryan Tannehill, who statistically did not have a bad season last year, let me stress that. There were issues on that offensive line, but Parker battling a hamstring, he's really got to put it together for them. What's your level of faith in Devontae Parker, fantasy-wise?
He's a player that I really like in terms of a dynasty league. Right now, I'm a little bit concerned about the number of mouths to feed in that offense, especially Jarvis Landry, and more importantly, the resurgent Kenny Stills, who's actually injured right now. So I suppose there's sort of need to see how he is with his injury. So I'm real hesitant to say much about. I think he's being overdrafted. I think he's better a reserve. And if you think about taking him as anything more than a reserve, I would not. I would take the next best player, and hopefully he's still around when it's your turn to pick again.
Okay.
And Kenny Stills, by the way, he had a back issue, and apparently it's not considered serious.
He's listed as questionable right now.
Yeah, but he's having a great preseason. I mean, he's been all about proving himself, and so far he's doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing.
And for what it's worth, when I woke up this morning, I was questionable. So
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
Eric Ebron, the tight end of the Lions. Now, here's another one that if your league mandates a tight end, if he can be healthy, one would think he stands to be fairly decent from a fantasy football standpoint. No, am I wrong? Am I crazy on this? He's battling an ankle. He says he hopes to be ready for Week 1 against the Colts, according to the Detroit Free Press. But says that he admitted that his fate will likely lie in the hands of head coach Jim Caldwell and the medical staff. That doesn't really bode very well.
Hang on, which player are we talking about?
Eric Ebron, tight end Lions.
So Eric Ebron, he's a third-year pro, which is really great. I mean, he's still a young guy, and he still has a lot of upside left in his career. And people like me and you, industry analysts and personalities, sort of were creating this conversation or making the conversation that, hey, this could be a year Eric Ebron breaks through in an offense that will be pass first, especially with Calvin Johnson gone. And despite the fact that I like Amir Abdullah is not a workhorse running back. They're going to throw the football. And that was great, except for the things that you mentioned and the fact that he hasn't proven himself. So at no point in the conversation this preseason was it ever Eric Ebron's going to be a tight end 1, or you should draft him as a tight end 1. The conversation is strictly, while there's some upside here, it's his third year. We need to watch him. In smaller leagues, he's not worth a draft pick. In deeper leagues, 14 to 16 teams or larger rosters where you might carry a second tight end, he's not a bad guy to have. I mean, you could do worse. So, that's sort of where I fit with him. The vast majority of fantasy leagues out there are 10 to 12 team leagues. You won't even have to think about them.
All right. In Atlanta, Julio Jones is battling an ankle, but will return to practice. He's not the one I want to talk about. Let me ask you your opinion, because I think he's a fantastic sleeper fantasy-wise, in Mohamed Sanu.
Sanu is a fantastic sleeper, worthy of a late-round pick. The thing with the Falcons' offense, and I can't say that Sanu's been having the greatest preseason. The Falcons' offense is built around Julio Jones first and Devonta Freeman second. And even last year, with all the injuries that the Falcons had, not all the injuries, excuse me, with some of the issues that they had, the fact that, Matt Ryan throws the football to Julio Jones. He almost seems to ignore, at least the last couple of seasons, the other wide receivers. So that gets me sort of thinking, yeah, he's a great sleeper, but I'm not spending a high draft pick on him. And in fact, he may be a player that 3 weeks into the season, if he's not producing, I'm cutting him to the waiver wire in order to get a better player.
Right.
Here, he caught 2 or 3 targets for 19 yards this past week against the Dolphins. I guess that's good.
Yeah, for preseason.
For the preseason. So 4 of 6 the regular season, 6 of 9. So that puts us at 60 yards. If he can score a TD, that makes it fantasy relevant. If he can't, he's just another player.
Right. Just another old-fashioned wide receiver that doesn't get you the points that you need. All right, Zach.
So we talked about Brandon Marshall, Mohamed Sanu. Who else did we just talk about?
Eric Ebron.
Yeah.
And Zach Miller now, tight end for the Bears. The Bears have been abhorrent in the preseason.
They were fine against the Patriots this past week.
No, the first teams. The number ones were I watched the whole first half of the Chiefs game, and oh my God, were they awful!
Yeah.
Couldn't do anything to the point where even Langford, who had been a semi-bright spot on the offense, was rendered ineffective, not inconsequential. Alshon Jeffrey dropped a ball, easy ball. Cutler was underthrowing on a lot of routes. The protection was breaking down left and right, miscommunications, missed assignments. It was just god-awful on all. Could it be the Miller's the linchpin? Sorry, I can't even say that with a straight face. I'm kind of writing off everybody on the Chicago offense, fantasy-wise, at least until week 4. We can reconvene. Thoughts?
Well, if you're a Bears fan, lucky for you, it is the preseason. So we don't exactly know what we're going to see in week 1. For some of the good we've seen a lot of bad, especially against the Chiefs. Now, let me say one thing: the Chiefs have one of the better defenses in the league.
True.
So let's put that right there, exactly where it belongs. Jeremy Langford did okay. Alshon Jeffrey made a couple of great grabs, and then he had at least one pass I saw go to him. I said, "Oh my God, I can't believe you just missed that." Kevin White is a work in progress. Zach Miller's not there, as you pointed out, even though I think they do have some pretty good younger receivers. I can't remember some of these guys. I know Josh Bellamy from last year. There's this one kid they have there now that actually did really well with Brian Hoyer and what's his name who left the game?
Connor Shaw.
What was that?
Connor Shaw.
Yeah, Connor Shaw. I can't think of it. I think it was number 85, Montgomery. Anyway, they've got some talented guys, and we're gonna have to see what they do in week one. They're not a team to get excited about. I don't think I would write off Alshon Jeffrey yet. I might downgrade Jay Cutler. I think I have him sort of as a solid QB2. I might downgrade him a little bit to a lower end QB2. I still like Jeremy Langford. I think he's going to be just fine. He's going to be their workhorse running back. I think the Bears defense was sort of, they weren't bad against the Chiefs. I know they lost. What was the final score? Like 20-7 or?
Yeah, it was 20-0. They were getting shut out pretty bad.
The Bears through the first half of football on defense were great, and I have no qualms with them. And in the second half, they started making a few mistakes here and there, but they were starting to sit some guys, and the score ended up being what it was. Who cares? So I'm not going to sit there and tell you that the Bears defense is bad. They've made some great moves this offseason, and I still think Vic Fangio is one of the better defensive coordinators based on how he handled that defense last year, which had many lesser talents, and took a team that gave up 225 points in the first half of the season and was able to get that down to 175 points. If they could keep their opponents at 20 points every game, they should win football games.
Yeah. They're very, very thin at corner. Kyle Fuller's out with having arthroscopic knee surgery, and then Porter went out with a concussion.
Yeah.
And so it's just there's only so much you can do.
Yeah.
But, all right. Good news for Packers fans. Jordy Nelson took part in 11-on-11 drills for the first time since returning to practice. So he makes that, as we saw last year, he's the key to that Green Bay offense. In Washington, Matt Jones' AC joint injury was off to the side at Monday's practice, so obviously they are taking their time with him. Is there a handcuff worth having on the Washington roster? Are you looking at Pierre Thomas or...
I don't even think Pierre Thomas is on the roster. The kid that, when Chris Thompson, I believe, is now the sort of starter hang on. That's not exactly true. Okay. As we're saying this, I'm pulling up that depth chart, which I actually was looking at today because we did our Redskins fantasy preview of all their fantasy players. It's on the homepage at thefantasygreek.com, which you should go check out after you've bought the draft guide, either in hard copy or Kindle form from Amazon.com or thefantasygreek.com by going to their search engine and typing Fantasy Greek Draft Guide. Okay, looking over the depth, do you like how I snuck that in there?
It was awesome.
It was really awesome, yeah. So Chris Thompson is the presumptive backup based on the depth chart. But the kid to pay attention to, I think, is this Rob Kelly, who he was an undrafted free agent. He's a rookie. He actually, I think he's 6'2", 20, 28, 25, something like that. Chris Thompson's a little bit more diminutive. He's a guy that, I think he's going to get some opportunity to play some football here for the Redskins. And if he takes advantage of it, I'm not saying Matt Jones has lost his job, but Rob Kelly could make an impact. And I don't think Jay Gruden, based on what we saw him do with RG3 last year, has the patience for any player that doesn't step up and produce. So, if you need sort of a short-term fix, I think it might be Rob Kelly, but you probably don't. I mean, it's too early in the season to be sitting there and dipping in there and getting a guy like Rob Kelly. But if you're like me, a football guy, and you're kind of interested and this is fun to you and you love the sport, He's a guy to watch. Matt Jones, from a fantasy perspective, I'm staying away from him.
Yeah, he's a flyer.
What's that?
He's a flyer, if anything, because if he hits, then great. But.
I mean, he projects well in this offense, in an offense run by an offensive coordinator that likes to run the football. And he did some amazing things last year, but he wasn't consistent. He was also injured. And here he is. He's injured again. And this injury, by the way, it's really funny how it's being treated in the press. It's sort of not a big deal, but it's a pretty substantial shoulder strain that typically takes 2 to 4 weeks to recover from. And that's in a normal person. That's not an athlete, and an athlete that is in a high-impact sport like football.
Right.
So I think there is a potential that he misses 1 to 2 games, and even then when he comes back, there's a risk of re-injury because it's the shoulder, and he's going to take a lot of hits there. So it's something to follow. It's something to pay attention to. I've downgraded Matt Jones on my board. I would only take him if he was my third running back, and I that's what I would advise people who are drafting this week. So that's where I am with him.
And there you have it, the book on Matt Jones.
There we go.
Looking if there's anybody worth mentioning here. Oh, well, let's talk about the Cowboys. Now, Romo's out.
Yes.
Dak Prescott, what are your hopes for Dak Prescott? Did you have any faith in rookie quarterbacks at all in fantasy?
In general, no. In Dak Prescott, absolutely 100% I do. Again, come to thefantasygreek.com. Right on our homepage, and I'm going to tell you exactly which article it is. It's the 5th article down. I wrote it myself, and it's entitled Bad Break for Romo, Opportunity Knocks for Prescott. How do you like that title?
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice.
You know me, how I like what would you call it?
Wordplay.
Like titles that sound like puns.
Yes.
So, we wrote about Dak Prescott in the preseason, and the title of the article was Dak Prescott, a good draft prospect no one is talking about. If you dial the clock back to last August, Dak Prescott was considered by many, and even into January, was considered by many to be the number one quarterback draft prospect. A lot of people say, well, no, it wasn't. It was, it was Carson Wentz, and it was, what's his name, for the Rams?
Jared Goff.
Jared Goff. And the fact was they were in the conversation, but so was Dak Prescott. The thing that was different about Dak Prescott is he didn't put up the kinds of numbers that Jared Goff did in a pistol-style offense that he was running with Cal. And Carson Wentz really came up on the scene in January in the Senior Bowl. And based on his last couple games as a senior in college, where he did some phenomenal things shortly after he came back from injury, Dak Prescott got into trouble because of his off-the-field issues. People forget he was the MVP of the Senior Bowl, and the Senior Bowl is the all-star game of basically the top rookie prospects with the exception of the elite few. And Dak had a tremendous game. So I'm not surprised that he actually has come out and done some great – and the great things that he's done, and this is where you kind of go, my God, this guy could be really good. Against the Seahawks starters, 116 yards and 1 TD on 17 for 23 passing. I know those aren't eye-shattering numbers, but this is against the Seahawks starters as a rookie. Through the entire preseason, he's 39 for 50, 454 yards, 5 TDs, and the best part, 0 interceptions. So as far as what I've been telling people that I send my top 200 updates to, I send the updates and then I include some notes sort of when they're looking at it, some things they should keep in mind. One of them I said was, obviously Tony Romo is undraftable now, and Dak Prescott is a reasonable substitute if you need a backup. And what I mean by that is not at the same rank as Romo, but if you need a backup and, you're in the last round of your draft, I think he's not a bad guy to get. He's going to get 8 games. He may not, be the greatest guy in the first few weeks in terms of fantasy points, but if what we've seen so far in the preseason, if you've watched him, he looks poised. He's incredible under pressure. I mean, he just doesn't get rattled. He's strong arm, accurate thrower. He's got chemistry with all of his wide receivers. Plus, he's got a running game that's going to help him tremendously and take pressure off him, and defenses will have to be honest with him. He's in the best spot right now to basically become the starter of the Cowboys going forward for the remainder of the season, even when Tony Romo is healthy and ready to return.
Yeah, so you're still buying high on all of the other Cowboys in the offense.
I'm not downgrading anybody. Okay. Des Bryant, to me, is still a first-round pick. And, in fact, I think Dak Prescott's going to love throwing the football to him.
Well, who wouldn't, honestly?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, but that's also my point, why Dak Prescott should be such a great fantasy player.
Yeah, I agree.
You know?
Amir Abdullah in Detroit. Are you a fan or no? Because he's battling a shoulder injury. 16 yards on 4 carries. Failed to haul in his lone target Saturday. There's people that are saying that he's really not the guy, and Theo Riddick is the guy in Detroit. Are you in that camp?
You know, well, if it were me, I would like to get Amir Abdullah more involved in the passing game, but because they have Theo Riddick, that's not going to happen. I like Amir Abdullah. I think he's explosive. His games will be sort of 60 yards, 70 yards, or suddenly, 120 with a TD. I mean, you're not going to get a consistent player. He's not an RB2. He's a top reserve. And I think on one of my teams, I got him as my fourth running back. So, I mean, it is what it is. This is going to be a pass-first offense, and that probably kills his value more than anything else.
Okay. And another guy that's an enigma, Josh Gordon in Cleveland. Are you in on him? Even though he's got the best what do you call it? The shady history there. He caught 2 passes for 87 yards and a touchdown on 2 targets Friday against the Bucs. RG3 is a little bit of a wild card there in Cleveland. It's Hugh Jackson's offense, though. So, are you buying Josh Gordon? Or are you late round flyering him? Or are you just staying away?
No, I'm not staying away. The way I've been targeting him is my, depending on how many wide receivers you're required to start in your league. Let's say it's 3. I would target him as my 5th wide receiver. Even my 4th, depending on who my first 3 wide receivers were. If my first 3 wide receivers were, for example, Brandon Marshall, DeAndre Hopkins, and Sammy Watkins, I might go ahead and pick him up as my 4th because I'm never sitting those first 3, ever. And the only way somebody else is going to play is if somebody gets hurt. So seeing as the wide receiver position is one of the less, a position where players get hurt, but compared to being a running back, I would argue not as much. Or the chances aren't as high. I think he's well worth it. And then in week 5, he's going to come out and he's going to do really well. I was looking at his numbers, and I don't have them in front of me, but I'll have them in 1 second. And he has actually had a pretty darn good preseason, and it coincides with RG3's resurgence. We wrote a nice article about him, too, that's on the homepage. As well as the number of weapons that the Browns are boasting on the field. Let's see, Josh was 2 of 2 on his targets this past week, 87 yards, 1 touchdown.
Wow.
That's amazing, and that's the kind of production I think you're going to see from him on the low side, meaning 2 for 2, 80 yards. And then he'll get TDs here and there. On the high side, he'll easily be a player that could top 100 yards and 1 or 2 TDs. I think he's worth buying.
All right, and one last injury of consequence, and we'll call it a week here. Greg Olsen, not going to suit for the final preseason game. Not necessarily that big of a deal, but he's battling a back injury. What does he do to the Carolina offense if he's not available? Does that totally does that throw off every Cam and even Kelvin Benjamin and maybe even Devin Funchess if you're banking on him?
Well, if he doesn't play, I think no, I don't think it hurts their offense because at the end of the day, there's just way too many. Again, there's too many great playmakers on the field. Better than the Browns, I suppose. You're Cam Newton, and now you have Kelvin Benjamin, Devin Funchess. What's his name from last year? That was really great. Ted Ginn. Ted Ginn, Jonathan Stewart. Cameron Artis-Payne has actually had a pretty nice preseason, which I'm very happy to see because he was a guy that or a player that came out of college a couple years ago and had a fantastic Senior Bowl, but has struggled to sort of translate his college game to the pro game. And I forget who the backup tight end is for the Panthers, but I don't think they lose a lot through their backup. Certainly not a Greg Olsen, but they don't. Is still decent enough to be on the field and somebody that will somebody will have to account for if he runs out in some sort of a passing package.
Ed Dixon.
Ed Dixon, there you go. Yeah, Ed's fine. He's a good receiver. He's a good blocker. He can do all the things that are required by a tight end. So first of all, continue drafting Greg Olsen as a top 5 tight end. Whatever the back issue is, I mean, yeah, he's in his 30s. That's okay. I mean, he's again another player that doesn't need the preseason. He'll be just fine.
Okay. Just wanted to. I saw that and I'm just like, it doesn't really bode well. He's a big part of that offense.
Yeah, but explain to me which part. I mean, what is he? Cam Newton still not going to have anybody to throw the football to?
No, but I mean, in any offense, the tight end is the safety valve, and if you have an athletic tight end, then that just gives you a lot of more options in the middle of the field.
They'll be fine. I just, so their offense changes a little bit. They're going to be fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you say so, from your mouth to God's ears.
I say so, and I've been doing pretty well so far in my prognostications. Okay. So I'm just happy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And with that, we'll call it a week. Sir, for Jim Sarantias from thefantasygreek.com, I am Keith Gree from 87 Sports Fans. You can find us every Wednesday here, 10 p.m. Eastern Time, handling all of your fantasy football questions and concerns all throughout the season. Right at latenightsportsradio.com to hear it live, on demand at iTunes, also at Spreaker.com. Good luck. Have a good week, everybody, and we'll see you next week for the big season preview show.